All right, it's John Wood here, the founder of Rageheart. I'm here with Uma Ayelet Furman. Is
Well
that right?
done. Got it. You
Yeah.
got it.
I had to practice that a few
Hey,
times. So she's the founder. You are the founder of the Institute of Somatic Sexology in Australia, and where you
I am.
blend two disciplines: somatics, which I think a lot of people. It's crazy. Most people don't even know what that is. Somatics and embodiment, this getting into the body, which is very much what I try to talk about on this podcast and at Rageheart and what I'm teaching people how to do. But so you take that side of it and then put it with the science of human sexuality, which to me, I mean,
We
these are
do.
two of my favorite topics, sex and somatics. So, and
They go
you're,
together
oh,
well.
they do. They do. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun today, I reckon, talking about this. Um, so, and then you've got Institute of Somatic Sexology.com. And is umafurman.com.au still rolling? You still using that?
I lost you there for a moment. Okay, the internet is back. All right. So our website is the Institute of Somatic Sexology.com if you
Mm-hmm.
or iss.com.au if you want to check us out. So I am the one of the founders of the Institute. My teaching partner, Deej Juventin, is the other founder, and we're both we've had this institute. We've had the institute for about 12 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a little while.
Yeah. That is a while. Because I still feel like with this, with somatics, it's still very, like it's well known within the somatic industry space, but outside of that, it's all very new. Like people who meditate, people who are very, they've tried all kinds of different techniques and self-help things to try and feel better, and yet the whole idea of getting into the body, a very simple thing, it's like this, it's like totally outside most people's world.
I know it's strange. It's the most natural thing for humans to do, and it's something that we naturally do when we are children and when we grow up. But then it's conditioned out of us through education and social norms and all of those and distractions. When we first started, nobody knew what that word meant. So we would have people, even potential students, coming up to us and saying, I want to learn the sexology bit, but what the hell is somatics? And we used to have explanations on our course descriptions and our websites. And 12 years on, we don't have to explain it nearly as much. And I also, I have my own private practice when I see individuals, couples, people in other styles of relationships who come to me and they're not asking me what somatics is anymore. So it's not, I can see that there is more awareness. It is growing. It's just taking its time, but more and more people understand the word, understand the idea behind it, and perhaps have had some experience with it.
Why do you think it's so? One thing I've wondered a lot is, meditation is like the thing. It's very common. So many people meditate. You got all the meditation apps. It's like one of the most popular. If you're stressed, if you're thinking too much, if you're anxious, just meditate. Just meditate. And I did that for, I meditated for a long time. But finding the somatics was like, oh, this is better. It's like it's similar in some ways, but it just comes with like with some of the theory of the nervous system and how to actually be in the body, not just quieting the mind. It was a whole different thing. So one thing I've wondered is it's so magical, the somatic stuff, but somehow meditation and some of these other things, which in my opinion, in my experience, they're missing the somatic piece in a lot of cases. And I've always wondered, why is that? How is it that they missed that? Or how is it that somatics didn't, like, how is it that somatics is not as big as, if not bigger than meditation?
I think the concept of meditation has been around for much longer. And so, where the idea of somatics, although humans have been doing somatic practices for thousands and thousands of years, but the whole, the word somatic, the understanding of what somatic practice is, has not been around for as long. So it's that sense
Hmm.
of awareness. There is Um, as human beings, we often love simplicity and simple solutions. So it's like, oh, just meditate. Well, what does that actually mean? How do we meditate? There are many meditations that are very somatic in nature, and
Mm,
there are some that not really, not so much. And so we kind of put this whole idea of, all right, meditation, and we put it in this one basket. But many things can be meditative. Sex
mhm,
can be meditative. Breath can be meditative. Movement can be meditative. Somatic practices that have to do with doing things with your body with a big sense of awareness, regulating your nervous system can be a meditative practice. And
mhm,
so we're using these words as separate, but actually, I think there's a lot of things that are very similar
mhm,
in them, but there are slightly different concepts
mhm,
society wise. I think I'm hoping, because I'm a hopeful person, that in a few years down the line, when people are saying I'm doing somatic practices, or I'm a somatic practitioner, it will be just as popular and just as available for people as meditation.
mhm, mhm. I mean, this stuff I should be taught in school. So that's when I'm doing it. It's like this is like imagine teaching people, teaching kids, teenagers, like having this built. It's like this is basic. It's like how to. It's like a manual for how to run your nervous system. And most people,
I
it's
know,
just they
right?
just yeah. It's and when you know like safety and how the fight or flight response works and how to regulate that with using your awareness in different ways, the empowerment that comes out of that. I mean, it's incredible. It's like I'm here in Peru with my sister. We talk about like you have these moments. We call them holy shit moments. Where like you're doing something, a little practice, and it might be a movement thing, and you have these moments when it's just like holy shit, like something clicks. Like there's a sense of awareness being that sense of being in the body, which is to me it was always very different to just having a quiet mind. There's this very distinct sense of like I'm landing in this physical whatever. And when that really comes in strong, it's it's for me anyway. It's like holy shit! How did I miss this after 20, 30 years? How did something so natural and so familiar? How does it also feel so totally new? It's like it
Yeah.
just blows my mind.
And do you find that a pleasurable experience or a pleasant experience? Or is it more neutral?
Oh well, this specific one, yeah. The holy shit! It's like a pleasurable like. For me, I get it when I'm usually doing like a in the case of somatics, like a usually like a movement practice. So if I'm like feeling the ground, eyes open, staying connected to the environment, and then bringing in like a really slow, gentle movement, sometimes
Hmm.
that just has this way of driving awareness so deep into the body where it's not just like the mind is quiet, it's like the whole sense of what I am expands. There's like a new awareness, and I
Yeah.
can't put it into words because words are just more ideas. So it's like a felt
Yeah.
experience of, you know what I mean? It's that felt embodied experience of,
Yeah.
oh, I am something else. I don't know what it is because you can't describe it, but it's tapping into that. And
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's like, oh my, because in those moments, it's like all these thoughts, all these stories, all the things that the mind likes to, rabbit holes it goes down. In those moments, it's like all that just falls away. It's like, oh, everything's fine. It might be uncomfortable, it might be painful, but the story just starts to you just oh the story doesn't really matter, and it's a
No,
felt
we're just here
thing of that.
now. Oh, that's beautiful. That is beautiful. And it's infinite, really.
Uh-huh.
There is no limit to how much or how deeply or how much I'm going to say stillness because that's the first words that come to mind. It's not accurate, but how much of
Yeah.
that holy fuck moment we can feel. And every time you go there, well, in my experience, when I go to those spaces, I go deeper and deeper and deeper. Um, and yeah, it's beautifully infinite.
Yeah. So like I can't remember why I brought this up, the holy shit thing, but I think it's because like, when I think about teaching this to people, or if this was more mainstream, it's like people starting to get this. Like because I can see people going through. I have a training that I take people through, and like, because I know I've been doing this for a few years now, like, you know it as well, like you do it long enough and you start to go, wow, like this is blowing my mind. And at that point, it's like it almost sells you on it. Like I'm at that point, I'm really much more committed to the process. But when people just get into it, sometimes I'm like, they don't really know what they're in for. Like they know, and they're like, oh, I want this because I want to feel a bit happier and I want to be a bit calmer and I want
Yeah.
to be better with my emotions. But it's like until you have the experience, you start have these moments. It's like you don't really know how it's going to feel. And so I'm excited for other people to try this stuff, whoever they do, whether it's me or you or someone else, for them to have that moment like, oh my God, like I had no idea it was like this. This is way better
I
than
know.
I could have ever imagined, you know?
And we don't actually have enough words in, at least in English. Well, I speak Hebrew as well, definitely not in Hebrew, that can describe those experiences. We don't have the vocabulary to describe those things. And,
Mm.
and when I sometimes talk to other people who are having these experiences, sometimes you just end up using sounds and images and body language to describe what it is that you're trying to describe, and other people who had similar experience would resonate. And so I always say, just say the first thing that comes to your mind. It doesn't need to make any sense to anybody but you, because often it's like, I think, especially when we're trying to describe a felt sense, it's not just a word, but it's the tone that we use at the time, and it's our expression, and it's how our body's reacting that helps pass that on to other people, although it's not a very accurate description of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's like the only way for them to really understand, or like it's not like we'd have to be that person to really understand it fully. It's like only they know, and words are never, even the best words, they just never. It's like trying to describe color to a blind person. That's one way to, I
Yeah,
guess, explain it.
yeah,
It'll never do it
yeah.
justice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to know about. Tell me about somatic sexology. We kind of it's a bit of a roundabout thing here. Let's get back to the sex because that's interesting. so, so tell me about somatic sexology. What is it?
Let me see if I can find adequate words to describe it. So we all know sexology, and sexology is the study of sex and sexuality. Now, sex happens in our bodies, but is also very, very present in our mind. We have a very vivid imagination. We love watching things, seeing things, interacting with things and people. And so we have, but and what has been happening in modern society is that more and more and more sex happens in the mind, and there's
Mhm.
less and less and less attention to what the body is feeling. And there's been this shift from how we feel to what we think, and that's been happening for the last few hundred years, and it translates into our sexuality. Um, and so when we look at somatic sexology, our intention is to bring it back into the body. There's nothing wrong with having a very active mind. There's nothing wrong with having amazing fantasies or wanting to watch amazing and interesting and things that turning you on, or interact with people like that. But we need to also bring up the felt sense of the body when we're experiencing things like pleasure and
Mhm.
arousal,
Mhm.
because we're missing out on
Mhm.
so much. So somatic sexologists work with their clients or their students' bodies to try and bring it up to par to what's going on in their mind. And so we
Mhm.
work with what we call the five somatic tools. You probably know about it from your own practices. We work with breath, we work with movement, we work with sound, we work with touch, and we work with where we place our awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use combinations of all of those tools or all of those pillars in lots of weird and wonderful ways to allow people to access more pleasure in their bodies. And there
Mm-hmm.
is no limit to how much pleasure you can experience in your body. The only limitation is actually your mind deciding that that's enough. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so to do that, like, it sounds really simple, but it is actually hard work, and it can be quite complex because not only we've learned to live in our mind really, really well and in all aspects of life, we also, as most human beings on the planet, have um, really shitty conditioning when it comes to sexuality. There's so much shame, there's so much inhibition, there's so many things we're not meant to do or allowed to do, or God tells us we can't, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of these resistances and blockages from accessing those beautiful states that we can access. So in essence, I think, does that explain somatic sexology? Like, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think so. I do have a
I hope
question
it
though,
makes sense.
because because I've been
Yeah,
talking
go
about
for
this.
it.
These like I talk to my sister about a lot of this stuff, which a lot of people are shocked by. But she has a podcast called Sex Money Rage, and so she interviews people about sex and stuff like that. So we end up in these conversations, and we're talking about I think like being in your body and sex and porn and so I'm curious how you'd answer this, right? So like if I was watching porn, I imagine the average person watching porn, which my understanding is this is a fairly mental thing. I'm staring at a screen. I'm not
Totally.
super connected to my body, right? But, so like I
Hmm.
get that part, but then at the same time, if I really playing devil's advocate, if I'm doing that, it's not like I can't like my dick, just to be blunt, I'm feeling that as I'm
Hmm.
watching it, which is so I'm still
Mm.
tapped into that at least. I might not
At
be feeling
least, yeah.
anything else in my body. It's probably just, I mean, I'm not really feeling anything. The only thing I'm really feeling is what's down here. Everything else is just invisible, except for the
Yeah.
screen. The screen and this, that's the only thing I suppose that exists. So that's
Yeah.
still playing the devil's advocate. That's still a body thing, right? Or how would you explain that?
Okay. So think of your arousal has two main pathways. One is called the psychogenic pathway of arousal. I think I get turned on. So I'm watching
Mm-hmm.
porn. It's whether I think of something or watch something, it's the same thing. I can get aroused by thinking of something or watching something without even touching myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like wet dreams are a really classic example of that. Then if I touch myself on top of it, wow, that feels even better. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right, there is some body element to it because, okay, I'm touching my genitals, I'm watching, there's something going on in my body, but everything else has disappeared. So my experience can be very intense because I'm only focused on this one or two things, one
Mm-hmm.
feeding the other, but very localized. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It can be a little bit limiting if it's the only thing that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And then if this is your habit, and let's say you do that a few times a week and you've done it for years and years and years and years, when you meet another person and you want to interact with them, your body doesn't always know, oh, okay, there's another person here. So I'm going to do all these different things that I want to do with this other person, and it's going to feel amazing. Often your body just goes, oh, but I know how to do this thing. But this is a whole live person in front of me that I want to enjoy them touching me and kissing me, but I'm not feeling as much as I could be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so think of what would it be like if instead of lying down or sitting and watching porn, you had your screen up and you got to stand up. And instead of just touching your genitals while you're watching porn, you touch your whole body, including your genitals. And what if you used some breath while you were doing it, like changed up your breath, What if you moved around a little bit and made some sound? That could be a very interesting and perhaps more fulfilling experience. So with the intention with somatics is not necessarily to say, oh, we have to switch the porn off. The intention is to, well, my attitude to it, there are lots of different schools of thoughts with that, actually. I think of it as, all right, we have this thing, it's working, but what else can we add to it to make this a more holistic experience, to make it a more fulfilling experience? Next time you watch porn, see what it's like to stand up, use your breath, move around, touch yourself in your whole body,
Uh-huh.
see how this experience, you might come back to me and go, that was bullshit. I'm not into it at all, but
Uh-huh.
might be worth a shot.
I mean, I've kind of got off porn over the last few years. It's been, I can't remember the last time, more than 6 months. It'd be like a couple of times a year, if that. Um,
Can I ask you why?
um, so as I told you, I'm here in Peru, and I'm in Peru partly because I want to work with I've been working with ayahuasca and San Pedro and various psychedelic
Mhm.
plant medicines. And one thing that you're familiar with these things, right?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So one thing that these things do, one aspect to them, is increasing awareness of how everything affects you. And so the more I've worked with these plants, and I've been done quite a bit by this point, I've noticed that, say, like with porn, I never really feel good afterwards. That's probably the simplest way to put it. And this is probably like alongside doing somatic work, becoming more embodied, going like it's
Mhm.
like a drug. It's like sugar, cocaine, like anything. Where in the moment
Yeah.
it's great. I'm like, oh, I can't think about anything else. And maybe even on the somatic note, you know about resourcing, right? So it really porn, I think, for probably a lot of people, I think certainly for me, it was a way to resource, to soothe and settle the nervous system. But it's not really like a true resource because it's only really working by distracting me from what I'm feeling. It's not resolving what I'm feeling. So I think as I've been
Yeah.
doing that and then developing my ability to regulate or soothe without needing porn, so I can go for a walk, even just feeling the ground and noticing the breath, eyes open, very somatic practices. Now it's like I can just sit down and like I don't need porn or really any external things to help the system to come down. So that alongside plant medicine, the increased awareness, I think is just basically turned porn into this thing that it's fun at the time. I suppose like alcohol is like this for me too. I don't really drink anymore, very occasionally.
Yeah.
Um, the same thing. It's fun at the time, but afterwards I feel gross and often quite negative. And I've even had for days or even like a week afterwards, like there's like a hangover. Same thing if I smoke weed,
Yeah.
interestingly. And I've even had more with, I mean, I've seen it with both ayahuasca and San Pedro, but I've had San Pedro journeys more so, which is a psychedelic cactus that grows, that's native to here in the mountains here. Um, and there's been a bunch of ceremonies where I've got my eyes shut and I'm just seeing, it's like a porn movie inside my head. Like, not exactly the same, but just like rapid, like a kaleidoscope of porn, of naked people, lots of everything, dicks and tits and everything. And at first I was like, what is going on? And then I think I realized over time, I think what it's doing, these plants are doing, is it's cleaning my brain or consciousness out. So what I'm seeing, because I think sometimes the vision I'm having is like a representation of the energy that's moving through the system or moving out. And so all these different factors, like the somatics and resourcing, just an increased awareness in general of how I'm feeling, which is somatics and the plants, and then even seeing that these plants are cleaning this stuff out. And sometimes I'll see things like spiders and sort of not nice looking things in connection with the porn, like there's something there. So anyhow, well, putting all that together, like I still crave it sometimes. I still want to, I'll read like erotica sometimes, but I don't usually. I find the visual stuff is the worst. Erotica doesn't seem to be
Yeah, it
such a big
is.
deal. Something about the visual, the way that works on the system, but Yeah, that's a very long-winded answer to the question, but that's basically why I don't
That's a great answer.
watch porn very often. Yeah.
Thank you so Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. And that experience of what you said in the beginning, I just don't feel great afterwards. I have a lot of people have that experience. It is quite a universal experience. And I think part of it is because we're not utilizing our body properly to and accessing all the pleasure that we can get in our body. And another part of it is and so we're not, sex and sexuality, should never leave a bad taste in your mouth afterwards. It needs to be an interesting experience, a positive experience. Maybe it might not always be positive, but we don't want to come out of it feeling yuck and feeling negative. And that's an experience that a lot of people have with porn. I don't know exactly why. I could think of lots of different factors of what comes into it. I think a big part is that we use uh, porn can be used as a crutch a bit too often rather than a toy. Like, oh, I might do that today, and tomorrow I'm going to do a whole bunch of other things. When we kind of think of porn slash self-pleasuring slash arousal that comes in one packet always, it tends to have a bit of a aftertaste. And what we try to do in the Institute, and this is something that we've been doing, you've been to one of our classes a couple of years ago. We run erotic embodiment classes where we teach people how to have pleasure in their bodies and access arousal without using their psychogenic aspect, without watching anything or needing to think of anything, to have that arousal coming from the body, and which activates this other pathway. You remember how I said there are these two pathways of arousal? So we have the somatic pathway of arousal and the psychogenic pathway of arousal. And I think when we lean too much on one, it leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth afterwards. And I think I feel there's something very potent with images, especially when we take in images when our body is very aroused, because we are in an altered state of consciousness. Arousal takes us to an altered state of consciousness, just like psychedelics, a different pathway, of course, perhaps different parts of the brain that are altered, but still very altered. So when we imprint with images at that, when our body is so wide open, when our brain, sorry, is so wide open, it has an impact. It has quite an impact on us, and perhaps we need to treat that with the respect it deserves and really think, okay, what is that? What is that? Is it that I'm taking in, and do I want to take that in?
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
again, I was talking about this same thing with my sister where she was talking about, I think it's like yesterday morning maybe, she comes in and says some story about human trafficking and a girl in porn in the US actually who'd been sex trafficked in the porn industry inside a Western country. Just a friendly, light breakfast conversation. And somehow we then started talking about like, so taking in. I've thought about that too, where it's like if I'm staring at this screen at who knows what, and right at that point of orgasm, it's almost like the system opens up, like you said. And this can be, I think, some of these ideas can be pretty foreign to someone who's not maybe hasn't done psychedelics or the idea of energy work, all this sort of stuff. It can sound a bit woo-woo, but there's certainly like whatever you're looking at or consuming, or even the people that you have sex with too. People would understand that. You have sex with someone, you spend time with someone, and a really just negative kind of person, you could walk away and feel like a bit of that same energy. So I wonder
Yeah.
with that, we were talking about like with porn, say you don't know you don't know, say, if the people you're watching in the porn have like they're there because they've been forced to be, they've been drugged. Like you don't know if it's a sex trafficking or human trafficking situation, and if it is, the amount of fear and terror and trauma that's running in that person's system is going to be very intense. Or even if maybe they're doing it willingly, but they don't really want to be there. It's just a way for them to make money. Maybe they've got a bit hooked in, like that's legal, but it's still not it's not a positive place, you know. And I imagine there's probably a lot of that, people doing it because they got caught up in it when they're young or something like that, and they don't really know how to get out. So anyway, these people who are doing it, watching them, and then, you know, if I'm watching that and opening up to that, how much of that energy comes through? And so we were like, how much of that negative feeling afterwards is the other people's energy that I'm watching? So then we're like, okay, so what we're saying is we're going to go find one of those ethical porn companies, because there's a few of them out there now.
Yes.
And test it
out.
out. I haven't tested it yet, but that's on the list of things to try, and to see if that feeling afterwards is the same or if it's different. And maybe I'll integrate some of your techniques as well.
I want to give a shout out to a local Brisbane ethical porn person. They have a website called Bright Desires. Check it out. Real people having real sex made here in Brisbane. So she's pretty amazing. It's a subscription because you got to pay for the good stuff. But you might want to try it out. There are some amazing artists, film people and actors doing incredible things around, amongst all the other stuff that is doubtful. But you know, I don't know if you heard of the term interpersonal neurobiology. Dan Siegel coined that.
I've heard of Dan Siegel. I don't really know that term though.
Yeah. So Dan Siegel talks about interpersonal neurobiology, which says my nervous system talks to your nervous system and we connect. And so if I'm talking to you through a screen or if I'm connecting with you in person, I believe maybe even if I'm watching you doing something, my nervous system is looking to connect with your nervous system. So if you're stressed out, it will stress me out. If you're having a traumatic reaction, it doesn't more necessarily make me have trauma per se. It could have vicarious trauma, but I am taking that in. That happens very easily and very naturally when we're intimate with each other, whether it's sexual intimacy or any other type of intimacy, interpersonal neurobiology, or sometimes it's called, we talk about co-regulation. We regulate each other's nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's just like, we can say, oh, energetically, I'm picking up these things, but we could also talk about the nervous system, because there's no woo-woo there. It's literally our nervous system checking out each other's nervous system, so we know if we're safe, so we know what we can and can't do or should or shouldn't do, so we know if that person is available to us and in what way. And this is another part of, in somatic sexology, we look at that a lot when we're looking at, okay, there's the pleasure and arousal and sex that I can have solo. And then there's the pleasure and arousal and sex that I can have with other people. And that's when co-regulation comes in quite heavily, and where we need to have that dual awareness of what's happening in my nervous system right now, what do I want my nervous system to do right now, and what's happening in the other person's nervous system right now, and how are we playing off each other.
This is so interesting. Like, yeah, co-regulation or interpersonal. I think co-regulation is easier to say. Interpersonal neurobiology. I get that right?
Neurobiology.
There we go. There we go. Or the other one that I've heard long before I heard co-regulation was just the mirror neurons. The way we automatically
Yes.
our brains will start to mirror
Yeah.
what's happening in the other person. And so
Yeah.
maybe it does happen on a very, because yeah, if it happens face to face in the real world, sure, can definitely happen on like a call, like a video call like this, or even just on the phone, like when you're upset and you call a friend to chat and you calm down. This is this co-regulation at work. It's like the nervous systems start to sync up, kind of like two guitar strings starting to come into tune with each other. And so then that's
Yeah.
a really we know that that's obvious. Like we all know that that's a thing. That's a really interesting question. So if you watch porn and the person on the other side, I mean, they're just having sex and maybe consciously there's not really much happening there other than they're having sex. But there may be all these nonverbal cues that we're not picking up on consciously, but that the nervous system is tuning into and then sinking in. So if that's so interesting. So if that person's scared or frustrated or defeated or they're feeling just negative in any way, how much of that do we then start sinking and tuning into? And then when you pair an orgasm and
Yeah.
opening up the energetic boundaries with that, does more of that come in? We're more easily influenced by, this is amazing. It's a really cool way to think about it.
Hmm. Yeah. And we have choice. We have choice of how we want our nervous system to be. We have impact on other people's nervous system. And when we're watching something, we have choice around what it is that we want to take in. And perhaps this needs to be another sense of awareness of, oh, do I want this? Do I want to be impacted by this thing
Mm-hmm.
that's on the screen right now? We always have
Mm-hmm.
choice around that.
Yeah, and then maybe that's why, like, say, erotica, whether it's like written or audio or something like that's a little bit different because it's just text. It's not like a real live person in front of you that you're watching. Maybe you're listening to, maybe because you'd be picking up on that person you're listening to a bit, but just text on its own. It's just words. It's
Yeah,
all
you make your own
imagination.
meaning. Exactly.
Yeah,
You make
very
your own
different.
meaning out of it. Yeah, there aren't any mirror neurons at work. There isn't a
Yeah.
nervous system to connect with. They're just words.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. So, one thing I wanted to reverse back to, you mentioned like
Hmm.
pleasure. Like a lot of people think, it sounds like, maybe I got this wrong, but it sounds like someone might come in and they've watched a lot of porn, but they're a bit bored with their partner or whatever. They're not feeling as much pleasure that they would like to. Are you saying
I
that
love,
by integrate? I was going to say,
no, go ahead, go ahead.
are you saying that by integrating some of these practices, the five different things you mentioned, and being more
Hmm.
embodied, people can start to access. It's not just better for the body, like, okay, this is just a good thing to do, like drink 8 glasses of water a day. Are you saying that there's actually more pleasure available that people aren't even aware of and maybe can't even really imagine at this point?
100%, absolutely. And it's got nothing, like you might be watching porn, you might not be watching porn. One of the people's main complaint is I'm having sex with another person and I notice that I'm stuck in my head. Whether it's because I've limited myself through my habits of watching porn but for most people it's not even that. It's I'm worried about what they think about me. I'm worried about how my body is looking. I'm worried about whether I'm doing a good job or not. And another, my one of my pet hate, am I performing well enough? This whole concept that sex needs to be a performance rather than fun and playful and pleasurable. So I'm stuck in my head, and sometimes I'm not even worried about anything. I'm just thinking about work, and I have no idea why I'm thinking about work because here's this person that's in front of me that I'm really into, and I want to have a really good time with them, but my body doesn't know how because my brain is my main tool of everything, and sex ideally we feel in our bodies more and more. And so let's say if we think of arousal when we get together with someone, you might not be at a 10 out of 10 arousal straight away. Things build up, right? So in those lower levels arousal, before our body kind of quote unquote kind of takes over, so to speak, um, if I'm really distracted and stuck in my head with a whole bunch of different thought patterns and scripts and shit that we don't need, I don't have access to what things feel like. And so it's really easy to say, oh, well, just don't think about it. Just don't think about work. Just connect. It's like someone says to you, oh, just meditate or just quiet your mind. It's not, it's, you need to know how to do it. And so by teaching people these tools and saying, when you get when you get distracted with whatever it is that's distracting you, here's some different breaths that you can use. Here are some different movements. Here's some touch that we're going to practice, and you're going to get really good at feeling it. A whole bunch of different things. Here's where you place your awareness. Here's how to ask for what it is that you want, because perhaps something's going on in that relating that you don't actually want, but you don't know how to say it. And it's not necessarily that your boundaries are being transgressed. It's more about, oh, this doesn't feel as good, but I don't know what will feel better. So I'll just stay with it and kind of tolerate it. And now, oh, I've checked out. I'm thinking about work. So there's all these little scripts that play out when we're intimate with each other that mostly we're not aware of. We're not as aware as we could be of. And if we are aware of, we don't know what to do about them. And so it's that sense of, okay, and this stuff should be taught at high school, really. As same as young adults and kids need to know how to regulate their nervous system just in life. Ideally, they learn how to regulate their nervous system and their brains when they connect intimately with themselves or with another person. So yeah, a long-winded answer to your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't remember what the question was now, but that was a great answer to, to the question. So it reminds me of like before I got into the somatics and working with the nervous system and being in the body. I remember I was living in Thailand at the time, and I loved going, like I'd go and get motorbike, like rent these really big motorbikes and go, not really race them, but drive way too fast through the mountains. And I felt great, like I made me feel alive, right? Stuff like that, whether it's drinking, partying, sex to some degree, drugs. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but once I discovered the whole nervous system model and way of understanding human behavior, it's like, oh, I think to some degree there was like a functional freeze in place. And so I was alive and things were good in many respects on the outside, but I didn't feel too much. And so I remember I'd talking to friends and I'd be like, I just feel a bit bored. Like life just feels empty or meaningless. Like it's fine, but it's just like gray. Like I didn't really even know what the problem was. I didn't have the words for it. And so, of course, that played out everywhere, including with sex. There's probably another reason why I needed to watch porn so much back then, whereas now it's like I just don't need it. So then when it comes to then connecting, it's if someone's completely disconnected from their body, it's like that's where all the feeling is. That's where the sense of being alive is, because you feel alive. It's not a thought, I'm alive. It's a feeling. You feel. It's just feeling, really. That's all it is. It's just feeling. Even if it's uncomfortable, at least it's alive. So that's what it reminds me of that. And then bringing that into sex. For if people are all in their head, they're missing like 99% of what's actually happening.
Yeah, they are. They are. They're not feeling, they're thinking. And, and I think as humans, when we don't have access to feeling, then we look for more and more extreme things to help us feel. I'm on a bike. I can die any moment. My adrenaline is just rushing through my body. I can feel. I feel alive. And so it's those extremes that you have to go to in order to feel, when actual fact, what we need to like what feels even better is to pare it all back, go slower and slower and slower, being more and more and more mindful, And that's incredible what you feel there. And you can't compare that to the endorphin rush of a bike, but you can feel just as much, if not more, by doing a lot less. And sex can be a little bit like that as well. There's that sense of, I got to have this orgasm. I got to do this, try this position. I got to go for 5 hours. There are all these things that that people try and grasp to help them feel more, when in actual fact, if we just slow the fuck down and connect and feel our and learn to feel our bodies and really feel each other's bodies, it's the most incredible feeling. It's just amazing. And I in my early 20s, I studied a lot of tantra, and that's how I got into this world. I spent about a decade in India through my 20s, and part of my interest in in India was this body of work that they had, which was called tantra. And most of the tantra I studied wasn't actually in India, because it's a very different world to how it was 5 or 6 thousand years ago, and it's a very conservative world. And for a young Western blonde girl, it wasn't very appropriate to study over there. So I got to study everywhere else but there. But they have there's a beautiful tantric ritual called the Mituna ritual, which translates to sex. It's the tantric sex ritual, and it goes on for 10 days. And people go, "Oh my God, 10 days! You have sex for 10 days? Oh, that's insane! How do you do it?" Um, and this is what is defined as sex in the tantric realm. So you start by the people who are in the ritual. It might be two people, it might be a few people, but they are separate from each other, and they're in completely different places, and they start meditating and getting into their bodies and feeling for each other before they meet. And this is happening over days. And then they start their own self-pleasuring practices, which involve breath work and movement and places of awareness and lots of touch and a whole bunch of different things. And then eventually they meet about halfway through, about day 5, they meet and they do rituals with each other. They bathe each other. They walk together. They feed each other. They massage each other. And every day they just get kind of physically closer and closer and closer, until on the last day they have intercourse. And the intercourse is completely still. There is no movement involved in the intercourse. They sit in the yab yam, which is the one person sit in a lotus position and the other one wraps their legs around them. And if there's a penis and a vagina, they'll have intercourse then, and be completely still for the whole day. Awful. I don't know if it's a whole. Sometimes it's just a few hours. And so on the
Just
outside,
a
it
few
looks
hours.
so boring. It's like, yeah, just a few hours. It's like, what the hell? It looks completely boring. But internally, you can imagine how incredible it is. It's so intense and so amazing. You don't even need to move for that
Yeah.
to be meaningful. And that's all about paring it back, slowing things down. And you don't need 10 days to do these things. You can do them with a partner or a play partner or a group of people or on your own for 10, 15 minutes and still feel the depth of
Yeah.
connection and the depth of experience with practice over time. Like, it's
Mm.
not going to happen the first time you do it. It might just feel a bit blah and boring, but over time, it gets pretty amazing.
Yeah, so it's like like they're what that sounds like to me is it's like this, it's like drawing out. I don't know, it's like this tuning into like these tiny subtle little sensations and then building that
Mhm,
and cultivating that, the
mhm,
awareness of that. So then it's
mm.
like instead of trying to find the most intense sensation like the motorbike ride or having sex really hard and fast, it becomes this, what's the tiniest amount, and then magnifying that with the capacity of awareness. And I
Exactly.
guess taking time to let it build up over 11 days or whatever it is.
if you have 11 days, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a
But
long
I feel
time.
that I feel it has an accumulative effect, meaning it's not the 10 days or 11 days you put it on in one time. It's the practice that creates the depth of experience. So if someone said, I can give you 10 days to do this thing, or I can give you 15 minutes every day for the next few months, I'll say, let's do the 15 minutes every day, because that has the accumulative effect that by month 3, your 15 minutes will be the most incredible 15 minutes ever, because you would have learned how to go deeply into your body.
Well, how would you, if someone's
Yeah.
listening to this and they're like, that sounds great, I'm in, I'm going to try this 15-minute thing. What do I do? What do I do every day? Am I like masturbating, or are we just
Mm.
touching? Like, is it a sexual thing, or is it maybe at the end of 3 months, you finally have a go?
So I'm not a believer in abstinence. I don't
Okay.
think it's healthy to uh s- stop ourselves from having things that we want. I don't think it's sustainable. Um, Let me think. So there are literally thousands of things that you can do in those 15 minutes. And if someone's listening and they're really curious, the Institute of Somatic Sexology runs classes twice a week that are on Zoom that teach all sorts of weird and wonderful practices about how we can connect more deeply with our bodies and with our pleasure. Um, and so come and check us out. We've got lots of things to teach. But if I think in general, we want to activate the body through those 5 pillars have been talking about for the last hour or so. And we want to generate some pleasure in the body. And so, however pleasure is generated in your body, including how you generate pleasure in your genitals, but not just focused on that. So if I have 15 minutes, I want to connect with my breath. I want to be really aware of my breath, and I want to play with different breath. Breathe fast, breathe slow, keep my breath really deep. I want to have some movement in my body. So I want to be standing, or I want to be lying down in a place where I can move around, move my hips specifically. I want to touch myself, and I want to touch myself everywhere, including my erogenous zones, which might or might not be my genitals. Everybody has different erogenous zones, but not just focused on my erogenous zones. And I want to touch myself in a variety of different ways. And some of those ways will feel better than others, but it doesn't actually matter as long as I'm curious and try different ways. Most people have learned to touch themselves in one or two different ways, and they stick with it. And that again limits our capacity to what we can feel, because I can't feel something different if I'm doing exactly the same thing all the time. So, and this is a bit of a learning. How can I touch myself in different ways? What are some ways that I can touch myself um, that perhaps my body's not used to or doesn't know really well? How can I touch my erogenous zones in a variety of different ways? Um, and how can I shift my awareness from what I'm thinking to what I'm feeling and what I'm doing? And that's the art, and that's the practice. Oh, I'm really distracted, or I'm fantasizing about something, or I'm just thinking about the laundry that's lying here in a pile. How can I shift that awareness back to what my hands are doing on my body and what that feels like, or what my breath is doing, or the movement, or what sounds I'm making right now? So you could do all of those things or some of those things in that 15 minutes.
It's really cool. It's like, I mean, I haven't played with this too much. To some degree, yeah, with sex, but even just generally, like I'll find myself now after doing this embodiment stuff, like a big part of it's been like following impulse, like not a thought, not
Yeah.
thinking, what do I want to do? What should I do? It's
Yeah.
like, all right, well, let's just like no thoughts. What do I want to touch? Like, I mean, I'm not thinking about what I want to touch, but I'll just start like moving around or changing my position of wow, I'm standing,
Mm-hmm.
not in a sexual thing, but I might just be talking to someone. And it just becomes like that's that embodied flow kind of thing. And see, what you're talking about is
Yeah.
taking that approach,
Yeah.
but almost with more of an intention of pleasure. So finding these
Exactly.
what feels
Follow
good,
your pleasure.
and then
Yeah.
follow your pleasure. Yeah, I was about following that little
Yeah.
bit. Oh, well, let's do a little bit more of that, and then that's going to lead over here, and yeah, okay, okay,
Yeah. And we do need a bit of structure in these type of practices, at least in the beginning, because sexual habits are one of the strongest habits humans have in their body. They're limbic brain habits. And so it's very easy to fall back into habit. So the moment my arousal rises a little bit, I'm very likely to go back into my habits, what I think works, what I know works really well. And so you need to be a little bit structured in the beginning, because if I'm using a variety of different touch, for example, not all, I'm, it's going to be, I need to be really clear. No, 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 I'm touching myself in this new way, not in my old way, because I want to open up to a different experience. Probably was the same for you when you first got into somatics. You learned specific practices, but now you just follow, the thread.
uh huh. That's like music. You learn some chords, you learn some notes, and you got to practice them in a certain way. But eventually, you're not thinking about it. It just becomes like a thing that you just
Exactly.
do. But
But
I know
if
what
you
you mean.
do
Like,
that right from the beginning, you're just stuck you're just gonna do your old stuff.
uh, like to be specific, because I've noticed this as I've explored these different things. There's different toys you can use, um, but it becomes like I don't know how explicit to be, but so like trying some of these touch things, for example, and at some point it might get too into I'm so turned on, I just gotta masturbate, and so I can just finish, like falling back into that because that's where I know that works. I know that's easy. I know if I just do that, I'll get what I want, and then I can relax and go to sleep. But it's like I've had to learn this over time. If I do that, then it's like party's over for a bit. Let's like put that to the side for a little bit and let's keep playing with this new way, and let's just
Hmm.
see where it goes. And we can always go back to that later, but let's make some
Nice, nice.
space. It takes a little
Yeah,
bit of
yeah.
discipline.
It does, doesn't it? Well done for
Uh-huh.
doing it. It does take discipline, because because they are just such strong habits. And your brain is like, no, no, I want this thing. It's like there's a lolly in front of you and you're telling yourself, I'll have it later. And that takes but it takes discipline until you have enough experiences that are profound and interesting in that space, and then it just happens naturally.
Uh-huh.
It only takes the discipline in the beginning,
Uh-huh.
and then because then you have other memories that your body's
Uh-huh.
like, you've created new memories, new experiences where you did manage to put it aside, and then
Uh-huh.
that kind of evens the scale a little
Mm.
bit.
Well, it can be a bit like having explored some of this. Yeah, it's like, oh, I didn't know I could feel this. Like, what is this? Like, it's this new
Mm.
something, I'm like, oh, that feels good. Let's like, oh, yeah, you get a bit of that taste. You're like, okay, there's something, because at first it's like, oh no, no, this is bullshit. This is just like some hippie woo tantra, whatever. This doesn't mean anything. But then you play with it. If you give it enough like room, you start, oh, okay. you know, you can still do both. You still
Well, you
go
have
back to
to,
the.
exactly. You can, that stuff that you already know, you're never going to forget it. It's always going to be
Imagine if
there.
you did. How do I do that again?
Yeah. You've done it
Uh,
way too many times to forget it. And
yeah.
so now let's just learn new stuff that you can do with the old stuff, or you have choice. It's all
Uh
about
huh.
having choice rather than doing the same thing over and over again, or the same few things
Uh
over
huh.
and over again.
Yeah. And as far as like potential goes, so there's no way to like talk about some of this stuff without getting pretty explicit. So, um, like for example, like I've very interested in this stuff, of course. That's why we're having this conversation. But say online, I can find stories of people talking about they've learned how to trigger an orgasm just with just playing with their nipples. Like
Oh
they've
yeah,
somehow created this
yeah.
association between sexuality and
Mm.
nipple play, and now they can just rub their nipples and they can trigger a whole. And I'm like, holy, how the fuck does that work? Like, I need to figure out
Mm.
how to do that. That sounds great. It's like let's just. I haven't
It
figured
is
that one
great.
out yet.
And let's talk about orgasm,
Uh
because
huh.
when we say, "Oh, I've triggered an orgasm," we actually have a huge capacity in our bodies to have a huge variety of orgasmic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of orgasm, when I say orgasm, most people think, okay, that's like an ejaculatory orgasm for a person with a penis, or maybe it's a clitoral orgasm with a person with a vulva, or a G-spot orgasm, and they're very specific areas that create orgasms for us. But there are infinite ways to have orgasms in your body. Some connected to your genitals, others completely not connected to your genitals. Some feel like a genital orgasms, others don't feel like that at all. Some are very quick, others are very prolonged. Some can go on for days. Some are more states of minds rather than experiences. It's huge. But me telling you, like you probably think, oh yeah, another hippy dippy bullshit. But people have been having these experiences for thousands of years. It's not new. This is
Uh,
not new, and this is the lovely, amazing side effect of being embodied and doing things somatically. So I don't think it's useful to just say, right, I'm gonna go off to have full body orgasm and that's my mission. And because orgasms can be fickle in that way, sometimes the more we chase an experience, the less likely it is to happen. Happens to a
uh,
lot of people with meditation. They had, or either they had one profound experience and they tried to have it again, and it becomes harder and harder, or they have this idea of what their experience should be like, and and they try and create it. And so, opening your body to orgasmicity, as we call it in the Institute, is about diving into your practice and being as present with your sensation as you possibly can, and generating a variety of sensation through all these different ways, and just knowing that eventually the cherry on the top, or the side effect of all these work, would be that you will experience all these orgasmic experiences in your body. And once you start experiencing them, then your mind really opens up to the possibilities, and there is really no limit to how much you can feel, or the
uh,
variety of experiences that you can have. So
so you're
just
not just
something
talking about
little for you to put.
so far. I don't even know where to go with this. So so one thing I've been exploring is I can't believe I'm talking about this on podcast, but why not? So I've been exploring prostate toys. Like you're probably familiar with like the Aneros, like where you trigger, um, you can trigger like involuntary contractions, which then apparently build into a
Yeah,
full body. I've read a lot about it, and so like I'm learning how to do it at the moment. And so it's exactly what you're talking about, where the more I can get the contractions going, but the more I chase it, the more I try to make it happen, the more it just stops. And so it's this,
yeah, you
but
have
it's
to
this
relax
weird
into them.
dance. Yeah, there's a certain element of like muscle control that's required to trigger like the contractions, but then there's also needs to be balance. Like it's this dance between like a tiny amount of control and then complete surrender, which is so
Yeah.
simple. It's the same thing with psychedelics, not the sex part, but learning how to let go. And
Mm.
even on that thing, like what you mentioned, I've had these times when everything just lets go and it's the most beautiful thing ever. But then I try to do it again and it doesn't work. And so it's like I can't
Exactly.
even make the letting go happen. I have to like, all I can do is be open to it happening when it wants to happen. That's all I can do. And it's so different.
Yes.
I think especially for the average dude, like that masculine, it's like a very, I guess feels more like a feminine thing of letting go of the control, allowing things to just be and unfold as they are. Whereas I'm used to especially as if you want to masturbate, you just go hard, enough friction for a certain amount of time, and the job's done. Whereas this
Not
is like
always.
the
Not always. There is an element of letting go that needs to happen even in an ejaculation.
oh,
So
okay,
one of
that's an
my
interesting.
specialties is working with people who have sexual issues and concern. This is
Uh
what
huh.
I do in my personal practice. And for a lot of people have issues with reaching orgasm, whether it's ejaculatory orgasm and clitoral orgasm or any other type. And so, and they get almost there, but then they can't let go enough for
Oh,
it to
interesting.
actually happen. Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
How fascinating. So okay, I know a little bit about letting go. We just gotta take it to the next level, which is the opposite of letting go.
Yeah.
Um, so the other
Yeah.
thing I wanted to ask was when you were talking about like you can have like little orgasms or all different kinds, infinite variety kind of orgasms all over the body. Are you talking about like a legitimate orgasm, or are you just like? I guess the skeptic in me is like, are you just talking about like a somewhat pleasurable sensation, like a little woo, like down my arm or something? Are you calling that an orgasm, or are you talking about like an actual orgasm, like in all these different parts? I'm trying to
What do you mean by
understand.
what do you mean by legitimate orgasm?
Well, I guess like so, like if like when I've done this before, if I start like just touching my body, like not even a sexual thing, but running my fingers down my arms, yeah, it feels good. There's a sense of
Mhm.
pleasure that starts to like I can feel that. I can certainly tune into that, but I wouldn't call
Mhm.
that an orgasm. An orgasm to me would be like well, more like an orgasm, I suppose. That's just a nice feeling. Do you see what I mean?
So what if yeah, yeah. So it's not that and not that. Right.
Mm.
So what if I told you, we'll do a little analogy that, or imagine orgasm like a cake,
Uh
right?
huh.
Let's say
Okay.
that there are lots of different types of cakes, chocolate cake, lemon cake, cheesecake, lots and lots of different types of cake. What you're experiencing in your body right now is one type of cake. You're having, let's say, an ejaculatory orgasm. That's like your chocolate cake. And
Mm.
there are all these other types of cake that if you've never tasted them before, it doesn't matter how much I try to explain what they feel like, you're never really
Oh
going
yeah.
to know
Okay. Yeah,
until that happens to you. Yeah,
we're back at
right.
this place again. Yeah, yeah, this is where we started.
Yeah, it's where we started. We're never really going to know. And so when you say, is this a legitimate orgasm or is this just feels nice? In my definition of orgasm and orgasmicity, I kind of have two. So there is the I am having this experience, which is it is more than, oh, this feels nice. I am feeling something that is big, that is taking over in some way. It could be big and subtle, it could be big and intense. But it's when it happens to you, you're like, fuck,
Mm.
that was like an orgasm, but it wasn't because it wasn't anything like what comes out of my genitals, but it feels like it was some kind of an orgasm. And then
I
you
mean,
also have going into it. You've had that?
well, sorry to interrupt you, but I've had things with
Yeah, no, it's
psychedelics
okay.
where like certain things
Ah,
happen with mushrooms, with LSD, with ayahuasca, where I mean, with ayahuasca is
yeah,
just more pleasure than like far more than
yeah,
anything else, any drug, any sex, like beyond all of
yeah,
it. And just from like, I remember once on mushrooms, it was like I could shut my eyes and just. I think I was with a friend and I just described like you ever just drop into your being, and I guess that doesn't make it like someone's like, what do you mean? Like, but I was doing something, was able to somehow just like and when I did that, just it was like an orgasm, but not an
yeah.
orgasm, but a very pleasurable like, oh yeah, like it was a great
There you
feeling,
go.
This is what you're
I
talking
would call
about.
that an orgasmic experience because it
Okay.
wasn't right. Because I would imagine that was going on. Not, it wasn't a quantitative thing. It was more of a state that you landed into, or was
Yeah,
it
I
a?
guess so. It was like something to do with the mind. When the mind would fall away, there's a certain
Mm-hmm.
expansion of consciousness or something where it's just like, yeah, I don't know. It's happened a few times, and when it comes in, it's just blows my mind. It's amazing, magical. Um,
There you go.
so
Why
yeah,
not call it orgasmic?
yeah. I mean, yeah, you can call it that. Yeah. So like, I see what you mean. Orgasm is like a describing like a very intense kind of pleasure, not necessarily a sexual ejaculatory. That's one
Yeah,
type of it. But in the
yeah,
same vein, it's almost like a genre. That's one
yeah.
song within the genre.
Nice, nice. I love
Yeah.
that analogy. That's a great analogy. I might use that. If you don't,
Go for
it's
it.
great.
Okay, so I think we might need to wrap it up. I know you might need to rock and roll pretty soon.
I do.
But before we go, if people want to learn more about you and the classes you do and maybe get in touch, where is the best place? Where are the best places for them to do that?
So check out the Institute of Somatic Sexology. Just Google that, or we sometimes go under iss.com.au.
Hmm.
All of our courses, we run practitioner trainings for sexological body workers, somatic sex coaches, and embodied counselors. We run bi-weekly erotic embodiment classes. We do lots of things. We also have, we're connected to a bigger community that runs festivals in Australia. There are more people running Zoom classes. There are about 4 or 5 classes a week that run on a regular basis. They're a great place to start if you're curious about this work, but you're not sure. Come and try out a class. If you don't like it, you can always just switch your Zoom off and go and do whatever other things you want to do. They're very easy to follow. They're not super explicit. Well, they're as explicit as you want them to be. It could be G-rated or explicit, completely up to whoever comes and attends. And so that's a really great and foyer into the work. If you're interested in reading things, the Institute has a great resource page where we have a huge library of all of our favorite podcasts and books and teachers. So check that out as well. And that's it. Yeah.
So that's all at I've got your website here, Institute of Somatic Sexology.com. Is that right?
Yeah. You
Or
got it.
ISS.com, I suppose, is a bit easier. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where they can find the classes, like the Zoom classes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you mentioned is on that website.
Everything's on our on the website, and
Mm.
yeah. Or if someone is in Brisbane and wants to come to work with me, they're very welcome. I have my own personal practice. I see people here in Brisbane, and I work with people online as well.
And so in personal practice, that's like the same thing that would be happening in like the Zoom class, but just one on one in person or on a call, or is that
Yeah, well,
different?
yeah, it's similar, but there's a variety of things.
Depends on the
I
issue, I
work with
suppose. That
Depending on what a person brings. So some people come to me because they're just curious. They say, I heard about somatic sexology. I want to know what it is, or I think this is going to be really good for me. Can I learn all these principles and do some practice? And other people come to me because they have a specific issue they want to work on,
Mhm.
which is somehow manifesting in their sexuality. And so we work specifically on that. So it really depends on what's up for, or what the points of interest are for people who come to see
Ah,
me.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I will have links to all that in the show notes at rageheart.co. Uma, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, John. It was such a delight to chat with you today. You made it
Uh,
super, super easy. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
no worries. I love talking about this stuff, clearly.